Right, so Israel is going to be dragged back to the International Court of Justice in a completely separate case from the one they are currently involved in with South Africa, and on completely separate charges as well. I commented when covering the South African litigation that in their case, they had only taken charges back to October the 7th, and that left a large amount of scope for another nation or nations to possibly come in and go back further. And indeed, that is exactly what appears to have happened. Indonesia is the nation dragging Netanyahu and co back to The Hague, or planning to at this point. The case is still being put together very much. We're very early doors, although we do have a date set with this news. But their intention is to bring this also makes Indonesia the first Muslim country to take Israel to court, which is also significant and on a certain level entirely appropriate too. They are also not doing it alone, their case being supported by Slovenia, making this the first time a European nation will be involved in a lawsuit versus Israel. And there's another case in the offing aside from this one too. There is a growing international consensus that it is way past time this Western-backed Zionist project called Israel was held to account for its actions, finally. Right, so as we all await a decision by the International Court of Justice regarding the provisional order requested by South Africa, demanding amongst other things an immediate ceasefire, a couple of other countries plan on keeping the ICJ busy with Israel for a little while longer. Indonesia, supported by Slovenia, are building a case against Israel that will effectively build on that which South Africa brought, in that they're going back before the events of October 7th, a lot further. Indonesia will effectively be building a case against Israel for the last 75 years of occupation and genocide since the Nakba of 1948. That is a lot of work. They don't have a lot of time to put it all together either. They will be presenting their case to the ICJ on February the 19th, so months' time basically. The Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi said of this case, "International law must be upheld. The right of the Palestinian people to self-determination must be respected. Israel's occupation of Palestine, which has lasted for more than 70 years, will not erase the right of the Palestinian people to independence. Israel's invalid actions must be stopped, and there needs to be accountability for the violations of the law that have occurred. Countries must cease their support for Israel. The international community, including the UN, must not recognise the legality of Israel's actions." Her Slovenian counterpart Tanja Fajon added, "This is a very broad spectrum of alleged violations that have been committed in the region for decades and whose horrific consequences are still visible today." Absolutely agree with them both. If the Palestinian people are supposedly in possession of the same human rights as the rest of us have under international law, then that should be upheld, surely. Instead, we've seen the total opposite, and an Israeli state so emboldened by the fact they never are held to account under international law, under human rights law, that they have freely referred to Palestinian people as human animals, and their most moral army, the IDF, freely film themselves desecrating personal possessions and laughing about it. And their president is even happy to be filmed or photographed signing warheads to be dropped on Gaza. Well, he's coming a cropper over that for himself, but that'll have to wait for another video. This free pass on human rights abuses that Israel keeps getting, though, has to end. There's a key difference in this case as opposed to South Africa's, though, which is that South Africa brought a legally binding case against Israel, and the Indonesian and Slovenian case will only be advisory. And this is because it is building on, in fact, a request by the United Nations General Assembly back in December of 2022, which requested that the ICJ issue an opinion on whether Israeli policies against Palestinians violated international law. And this followed a UN Human Rights Council investigation of violations and abuses of human rights law in the occupied Palestinian territories. And, well, of course, they found plenty of evidence for that. A motion to put this request to the ICJ passed 156 to 6 with 25 abstentions. And this, of course, was back in 2022, when the world was still basically fawning over Israel, eyes not yet having really been opened like they are now. But it's only now in this era of social media, where we're not reliant on biased mainstream media to inform us, and that we can inform ourselves, that the truth has come out, and people are rightly demanding something be done about this rogue state and its conduct towards a land and people that is occupied for decades. So what does it mean to only be advisory then? Well, whatever the finding of the ICJ, it won't be legally binding. And an Indonesian international law expert called Hikamahanto Juwana spelt it out. He said, "The hurdle is, of course, the advisory opinion is not the same as an ICJ court decision. An advisory opinion has only a moral binding, and this is addressed to the organs of the United Nations, which in this case the address would be the United Nations General Assembly. Secondly, if the ICJ make an advisory opinion and if it is in favour of the people of Palestine, the question is whether Israel will observe the advisory opinion. Will Israel state that yes, Israel has occupied Palestine illegally, because that is the main question being asked of the ICJ. Morally binding only. Do Israel have the morals? They do like talking about morals, don't they? Their most moral army again. But this also shows what Indonesia and Slovenia are trying to achieve here. They are attempting to get an opinion from the World Court on the legality of Israel's occupation of Palestine. It is, of course, illegal under international law. This has been ignored for decades. Yet despite this only being advisory, a decision from the ICJ going Palestine's way would echo around the world. The legality or illegality of Israel's occupation would be there for all to see in black and white and no longer, frankly, a matter of dispute. For Israel to refuse to leave Palestine, to cede control of the territories, would effectively render any further support for them a violation in the eyes of most people around the world. Now, I'm not a law expert. The question I have in my mind right now, which someone watching might care to answer who knows more than me, would be as to whether anything legally binding could be built on as a result of an advisory ruling. It's for Israel to choose to listen to this ruling if it goes against them. If they don't, can some form of legal censure follow for them illegally occupying territory or continuing to do so? I'm also wondering what is taking Syria so long to join in on this. Israel also occupied the Golan Heights. Do they not want them back? Ultimately, though, if Israel choose to ignore this advisory ruling, they will truly be a pariah state in the eyes of the world, and those still insisting on supporting them will find themselves more and more alone and isolated in their opinions. So I'm looking at you, Genocide Joe, Anthony Blinken, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, Ursula von der Leyen and more. Increasingly, they will be in the minority. So yes, absolutely looking forward to what comes out of this. But even this isn't the end of the litigation facing Israel, as a case for crimes against humanity even, is being taken to the International Criminal Court, also based in The Hague, this time by Mexico and Chile. Now, where the ICJ is an instrument of the UN, the ICC is independent of the UN, and where the ICJ brings rulings against whole countries, as demonstrated in the South Africa versus Israel case, and now this Indonesia and Slovenia versus Israel case, the ICC brings prosecutions against individuals, and these can be for war crimes or crimes against humanity. Now, this one will be interesting because Israel is not under the jurisdiction of the ICC, but Palestine is. They've been a member state of the ICC since 2015. And this follows submissions to the ICC regarding Israel from a number of other countries now: Bangladesh, Bolivia, Comoros, Djibouti, and South Africa. I have to mention something about Djibouti here, actually. It's notable they've done this, since the US wanted to cite rocket launchers to strike the Houthis in Yemen in Djibouti, since it is the country in East Africa on the other side of that narrow 16-mile wide strait where Yemen have been blocking Israeli shipping, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, meaning there are literally no friends of Israel on either side of that narrow body of water. But there we are. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see who they choose to prosecute and what strength that prosecution will have, given Israel aren't under the jurisdiction of the ICC. And it piles more weight on the ICC chief prosecutor, a chap called Karim Khan, who has for months now faced accusations of having pro-Israel bias himself for dragging his feet over these referrals. It's inexcusable. He should be doing his job. If he doesn't get on with it shortly, people will rightly be asking even more questions as to why that is. Israel is a country that right now would rather abandon its own people taken hostage by Hamas than consider a ceasefire, as Benjamin Netanyahu has just proven if you watch this video next. You can find out all about that. Hardly the actions of a country or individual, frankly, that deserves to dodge a day in the dock. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.